Alright, this is my latest essay on K-12 education reform. I call this one Digging Up the Past. The reason I call it that is the major focus is on philosophy, and we do not encourage students to take any philosophy courses, certainly not in this area, and it's something that, well, let's look over here. We want what? Critical thinking. What's critical thinking? Formal logic. We'll get there though. So anyway, point being, there's a lot of facets to philosophy, and one of which is literary works, and this is where we've gotten so focused on an English department and exposing everybody to works of fiction that have been deemed sacred by the school curriculums to be taught. And problem with that is that a lot of times students won't read the material, myself included. I had no interest in reading anything about scenery. My reading, I didn't realize I liked to read until I ran into philosophy, which was pretty late in high school. But thank God I did. Um, so one thing I kind of wanted to point out here is that there's this notion that you have to have studied every scientific subject to be a scientist, or you have to have taken enough credits to get a bachelor's degree in philosophy to be a philosopher. But in truth, we're all born scientists, which are strictly observers, and philosophers, which are strictly thinkers. Um, what happens is um, uh, we have, between our limited time and resources and the institutional systems that put into place a particular nomenclature that's nearly impossible to grasp unless you're a quote-unquote expert in the field. But a lot of that is unnecessary terminology, and again, uh, in the field of medicine, it leads to ambiguity and errors. So it's best that we get a handle on our language, and that's another thing that philosophy will help us to do. Because what happens is eventually, well, I'll get there. So it wasn't that long ago, a couple centuries ago, that a person that we call scientist today was actually called a natural philosopher. So make of that what you will. So there are many facets to philosophy, as with the sciences, but they share a never-ending process of questioning one's observations and hypotheses. The questions are relevant and necessary for either field to exist. They are questioning fields. You're looking for reasons not to believe what you consider to be the truth, essentially. So, if you're totally dismissive of philosophy, which many people are, they often have a negative opinion of it. But worse for them is that they completely neglect the type of thought that you can't get elsewhere. And in particular, we can divide philosophy really simply into continental philosophy and I call it formal logic, but it would be analytical philosophy, which essentially is American philosophy. Everything post 20 in the 20th century. Um, Now the thing is that there is so much rich information in the continental works, everything from the Greeks up through the existentialists. Um, those are all things that children should be exposed to. Now, here's the one that parents are going to like: formal logic. Um, it's known by many names: first order calculus with identity, first order predicate calculus, whatever. We won't worry about the names, but the point is it's a system that allows you to do a lot of things. Um, well, I'll start on the second one. The way logic came about as a formal study, as a science, right? A science is a systematic study of something where your terminology is very well defined, which it is in logic. Terms such as validity, completeness, those are terms that you just don't throw around. Um, but there's a lot of aspects to formal logic that we don't appreciate because, well, let's see, it forms the basis of both the computer hardware and the software that runs the world these days, right? It allows the symbolization of sentences so as to evaluate statements and arguments without any content in a purely formal manner, and that's where the name formal logic comes in. You're really just looking at the form of the sentences, and that'll tell you a lot about whether or not the argument is valid. At which point, then you can go back and put the content in, and then you're looking at, is it sound or unsound? Meaning, is it this way in the world or not? So a weaker form of this first order calculus is called propositional logic. It's what standardized tests like LSAT require, and again, this is where teachers and everybody, let's get excited. If you want your kid to do really well in the ACT, have them get a philosophy background, both continental works and formal logic. They can get this at 8th grade, I think. I think they have enough linguistic and mathematical sophistication to handle the needed transformations in logic. So, yeah, you can't say anything bad about philosophy. Well, you can, but philosophers won't listen. So, let's see here. So the way I look at my degree is that, because I got a college degree in philosophy, but I'm not saying that this is what people should be doing. They don't need to. What's nice about philosophy is you can just extract what parts you need, and you don't have to learn the whole history of it. Because essentially, to me, a philosophy degree is a history degree, but with a little more to it. Because you're really talking about the history of human thought throughout the ages. In any given time period, a philosopher's system of thought will reflect the technological advances of the day, those kind of things. So you can't really remove them from the time period in which they wrote. So in that sense, they are trapped in history. However, their literature, their literary works are timeless. What's important to note here is philosophy is not a religious undertaking. This does not mean that topics don't overlap. They're not mutually exclusive subjects. There are religious philosophers, but the main difference is that different lines of philosophical undertakings are not really attached to. There are, but the more advanced um, uh, lines of thought don't attach themselves to any sort of dogmatic thinking because it's proven to be detrimental in the end. Um, but the main thing that philosophy allows you to do is it gives you practice suspending your own current belief system, which is a big thing for people that are, I don't know, uh, have trouble questioning their own belief systems, especially if they're, you know, came from a very religious background, which is unfortunate because you can come from a very religious background and still suspend your belief system so as to appreciate what other people um, uh, think. But oftentimes, again, there's a dogmatic thinking in religion that circumvents any kind of discourse. Not always, but generally. So it's best not to. I mean, the overlap is with like ethics. So, um, but it's always good to suspend your belief system, knowing that hey, on the first approximation, you're probably not going to be right. It's probably not going to seem right. But further inquiry, you never know. It might serve a purpose. So, again, it's the journey. Oftentimes, because I don't know, when I wrote this, I didn't really feel like I did anything. So, um, this is again, these are just 5 reasons that. What are these 5? Well, let's just see. Yeah, immediate benefits. Well, one was I realized I enjoyed reading, which is nearly 100% nonfiction reading, but that was well into high school that I first started picking up books. That's a little late, I think. Um, Second point is questions that run through people's heads, especially people like me. They don't get discussed in typical academia, and so finding these classic texts is very nice because it at least gave you something to interact with. Um, because students weren't talking about this kind of stuff either. Um, Again, there's a comfort in the journey, even knowing that the question might not be answered or it might lead to more questions. It's the same predicament you run into with the sciences, but what have we noticed with the sciences is they're still advancing in a progressive way, and the same goes for philosophy and formal logic especially. Um, let's see here. Uh, Part and parcel why I liked it in the beginning was it's analogous to physics in the sense that you don't need to know a whole lot of um, information to apply it to just a whole bunch of different situations, and that's the beauty of it, is that it's applicable in as many ways as your creative mind will allow it to be. So, point 5 is the enlightenment that you feel as you're reading is really your active engagement between your mind, between your mind's imagination and whatever is being discussed in the text. It's hard to be actively engaged in uh, subjects where you're not interested, or they're merely designed to pile a bunch of facts in your head. Which, hey, been there, done that. I can do it, but I feel that being able to think on one's feet and have that improvisational sort of attitude comes in very handy, and I believe I got that through philosophical uh, work.